These women will affect your life in the very near future. These women will create an impact in American life which determines how you and your family will live. In just 45 seconds, you'll begin to understand why. Tomorrow's Careers, presented by the Johns Hopkins University and the ABC Television Network from the studios of WAAM in Baltimore. Each week, the Johns Hopkins University brings you the highlights of a different career to tell you the story of the people who work in it, their preparations and rewards, and give you an insight into the problems they solve. This week, we explore the careers open to women in radio and television. And here to introduce our lovely guests is your host from Johns Hopkins, Lynn Poole.
Well, you see, one of your question, I don't know which one of you asked the question, but this really is a men's world in here. It's men's domain. But there's no reason why you girls, if you prepare and train for it, can't have a job in a control room like this.
But Mr. Poole, are there really opportunities in radio and television for women?
Yes, there are. There really are, and that's what we want to explore with you tonight. So stick with us a while I greet everybody at home and tell you that these very lovely young girls here are all students at Goucher College, and you're going to meet some more of them as we go along. I'm sure you envy me my job tonight because I'm going to take them around the station, and we're going to answer a number of questions for them. Now, as you've heard, this week we want to explore the many fascinating, rewarding, profitable, and enjoyable careers which are open to women in radio and television. This week, we'd like to settle for once and for all a question. And that question is the question they've been asking us here: is there a place for women in radio and television? Girls, the answer is emphatically yes. There is a place for you. And you young ladies, if you want in on this career, there is room for you. Well, your next question is, what will you do? What jobs are there? Well, watch a minute as we see what a number of women are doing today.
The first career one links with radio and television is that of the actress, the lady who gets her man or forces the crooked politicians from office. Next in line is the food demonstrator, the home economist who gives the ladies the latest recipes. Also across the nation and the world, there are many lady announcers. The shouting men could learn from these gals. The legal eagle is needed, and radio and television offers real opportunity to women. All networks and many stations have their directors of religious programming, and in most cases, these directors are women. Women, too, are serving as program managers in many local stations, where their awareness of community needs are profitably acute. Likewise, the public service activity of the station can be handled sympathetically by a woman. Again, the woman's angle. The woman's sensitivity to community thought is well handled by women through the press and public relations work. One of the best ways to crash the TV gates is with a typewriter. And there are many uses for a writer in this business of broadcasting.
Well, we can't mention each and every job for women in radio and television. I've been telling these young ladies that there are just too many of them for us to talk about in particular. But there are jobs in education, news, sales, clerical work, special events, public relations, towns, and a dozen other areas. Now, one of the most interesting jobs in today's communication is that of the radio television coordinator for station relations at the United Nations. This is an important position held by our good friend, Mrs. Dorothy Lewis. Now, Mrs. Dorothy Lewis was the founder of the American Women for Radio and Television. She's been in the business a long time. She's got a lot of answers to a lot of questions. But to give you a rundown on the many activities of this amazing woman and the effect that she has had on both radio and television would take me an hour. But let me sum up my introduction to Mrs. Lewis by saying that she has had a strong influence on the growth of radio and television for many years. And I'm sure Mrs. Lewis won't mind if I say she's been a real pioneer in this whole work. You wouldn't mind that, would you, Dorothy Lewis?
Well, Lynn Poole, that's a loaded question, I may say, but you're partially right. And I'll go along no further, however. I'd agree with everything you've said about the power, potential, and professional possibilities for women in radio and television. Naturally, you know, I'm just a little bit prejudiced because I've been in the business for 30 years. Well, I hate to think of it. But there's no doubt that this profession is wide open to women, and there's absolutely no argument with the fact that some form of communication, be it radio or television or writing, is one of the most exciting and challenging professions in this modern world. Now, Lynn Poole, I don't want to talk to you anymore. I want to talk to the women right here in the studio and all the women that are listening in. I want you to think of the impact of radio and television, the vital and powerful part that it plays in our everyday lives. Now, we go to the store, we women, and we buy a product because we've seen or heard about it advertised on the air. Oh, now, don't think we don't. We do. And as a matter of fact, you don't even decide your own purchases. Products are decided for you. The product sales impact is fabulous. Now, that's just one impact that's carried by television, and the other is perhaps the political power that's contained in these little boxes that we're looking at right now. Opinions are created and molded by the honest or insidious manner in which people use radio or television. Civic enterprises are won or lost by television and radio. And just think of our culture and music and art and literature that are affected by radio and television. Well, you know, they say that we're what we eat. I tremble to really mention the fact, but we're what we see and hear, too, as a matter of fact. Well, take just children, their habits, their thoughts. The training of children are partially formed by radio and television. Just think for a minute that this little piece of glass that you're watching right now is a kind of modern Svengali, or I might like to call it an Aladdin. Well, thinking of radio and television in these terms, women most certainly must take a leading role. Women can and are finding professional and personal satisfaction, and I stress the personal satisfaction in such careers. But it's hard work, let's face it, squarely. You women who want to get into radio and television will find 2 strikes against you because you'll have to work harder than men in order to prove that you can do the job as well as a man. Now, this is true in other businesses as well as radio and television. Careers in radio and television are not as simple as one thinks. And as a little girl thought, I might tell you a lovely story. She was blonde and very pretty, and like all 8-year-olds, wanted to dress up. And one day she decided she wanted to be a television star, and somebody asked her why. And she said, and I really must quote, she said, because all the stores give you their very best clothes to wear. You don't have to do any work. And when you've done your act, a man walks out and asks people to applaud, and then he says, isn't she beautiful? And for this, you get gobs of money. Well, I don't need to tell you that there's not a word of truth in this. The truth is you have to work hard, and you have a lot of fun, and you get great satisfaction from that work and fun. Now, where did women really start in radio and television? Well, let me tell you that they started right here in many, many cases. And they're doing a wonderful job as home economists. Well, now my friend here is Lou Calfrey. And she's the wife, by the way, of Kennard Calfrey, who is on the cameras this very minute. I like to call them a husband and wife team. Now, Lou is a living proof of several of the careers available to women in radio and television today. Now, Lou, tell us what you do, and tell us how you got where you are.
Hello. Most of my viewers and friends think that I have a very easy, glamorous, 45-minute-a-day job, just whipping up scrumptious foods on a daily TV women's program. This, however, is just a surface picture. Behind this lies a great deal of planning, creative thinking, and, of course, organization. We can never indulge ourselves the luxury of waiting till the last minute to decide, now what shall I do today, and then just leave it to a whim. 2 or 3 weeks in advance, I decide on a theme for each day's program. Then I integrate the features, guests, and the commercials into a different theme each day. Now, for instance, last week we had Easter ham cookery. We also had Easter egg dyeing and decorating. We also had a Hebrew Passover Seder table. The real challenge, of course, comes when the calendar suggests nothing and you must rely completely on your imaginative resources. Then you come up with a program where you prepare an original Indian curry, and you might have a how-to sewing feature on an Indian sari skirt. Other days you might do something that would suggest a completely different theme, maybe chafing dish cookery, which we have here. In addition to the planning, it takes a good deal of time to shop for groceries and do the pre-program preparations. Now, there are some days when a thing that we would prepare would take 3 different stages. Since all of this must look very effortless and free-flowing on television, there are many stages of cooking that have to be done in advance. Then, of course, I have to answer mail, meet sponsors, all of this in addition to the actual air show. This may take 8 or 10 hours a day, sometimes more. But since I'm my own taskmaster, there are days when I can certainly skip out early. Hi, Dorothy.
And Lou, it's good to see you. You have to meet me, too.
Thank you.
It's wonderful to be here. And a lovely kitchen, just charming.
Thank you. Smell anything you like?
It's wonderful.
Are you
Now,
a
look
pot
inside.
peeker?
I am a pot
You
peeker. I'm a
certainly are
taster.
welcome.
Just look at me. It's elegant. Now, tell me something. How did you get into television?
That's a question always that people ask, and it's a loaded question as far as I'm concerned, because when people hear the answer, they say, oh, but hear me out. My childhood and my college sweetheart became a TV director here at WAAM, and after we were married, we were offered a Mr. and Mrs. television program.
I just talked about the fact that you're a Mr. and Mrs. team. It's wonderful.
Oh.
Well, now, tell me something else. What kind of educational background did you have for this?
Well, most people, of course, think that women on cooking programs have been home economics majors, but this isn't always true. I myself took a bachelor's degree at the University of Maryland in sociology and took graduate work in drama at Catholic University.
Ah, the drama was the answer. I knew there was.
Well, not entirely.
Huh?
My father had a great deal to do with it. When I was a teenager, he taught me how to cook.
Ah, now I really know the answer.
Well, as you can see from what Mrs. Calfee says, there's a lot of work to it. It isn't all glamour in the kitchen. But I can vouch for Mrs. Calfee's cooking, and so can all these men right here in the studio. Because if you were here when a show went off the air, and when she's finished cooking, you'd see them all go, whoom, like that, right over to get the food that she cooks. Now, Mrs. Lewis, I happily and personally know, is a magnificent cook herself. So what I suggest is that these two gals get together and talk over their cooking problems and get on with a lot of other things, because I'm sure that just like the cooks in the early days of radio and television, well, they got together, they worked their way out of the kitchen to other jobs. And I suspect that that's the way they did it, and that that's the way they proved to management that a woman with a cause and a belief can do wonders. She can do wonders for television. Isn't that right, Dorothy Lewis?
Yes, indeed it is. And many women didn't start in the kitchen. They began in many other jobs. You know, women know how to talk turkey to other women. Let's look at it this way. Listeners and viewers, actually, Lynn, are daytime viewers and listeners. The men are at work. And so while the men are at work, the women do watch and listen. While they're working around in their homes, they're receptive to ideas and entertainment. They hear commercials of certain products which have been prepared on the advice of professional women. And the copy has been written by women in advertising agencies. This is logical because women know how to approach women and they know how to sell women. Now, along with the shopping shows and cooking programs and other daytime programs, there are those mistress of ceremonies, those glamorous women who do a lot of interviewing. And they interview famous people and they present civic causes. Now, Lynn, I don't need to tell you that we can't underestimate the power of these women when it comes to progress, civic progress. A woman in the business of radio and television believes in what she's doing. She looks upon her job as more than a livelihood. I can tell you that. I know. She's responsible and responsive, and even more than that, she's propulsive. That's a good word, isn't it?
That is a good one.
Well, you know, many of the vital projects for progress in cities have been, let us say, jet-propelled by women's civic leagues and League of Women Voters and the like. And behind them, over and over again, are women in radio and television who organized these sentiments and galvanized them and put them onto the air so that they brought about civic improvement. If young women want a job, which will give a great satisfaction, just look carefully at the ones we're going to discuss right now.
Well, believe me, Mrs. Lewis is right. Don't underestimate the power of a woman on radio and television. They do have these civic causes. They do have these things. They sell things, and they believe in what they do. And that's their power. And I think you'll agree with this. Think of the women in your own local stations. Think of the women that you've seen on television. They have that certain something that is really very powerful. And I know that Mrs. Lewis's work for these past 30 years that she told us about have influenced a lot of radio and television. As a matter of fact, it's been international. She meets and works with hundreds of women in foreign countries, very close with them. And we can readily picture these women. We have a sincere concept of their importance. We know the power for good that these women have, and this is a great thrill for a woman who has this as a career. Now, I mentioned the international aspects, Dorothy.
Yes.
I have friends around the country, too, and I'd like you to meet 3 friends that I made in England when I did 3 programs at the BBC. The first one was Mrs. Mary Adams. You see her here with me in the BBC studios in London. We did the first American programs to be done over TV in the British Broadcasting Company. Mrs. Adams had a great influence on the formation of new policies at the BBC.
That's interesting, Lynn.
Oh, she did a tremendous amount for them over there. And here is Miss Jasmine Bligh. Miss Bligh was the first woman announcer on television anywhere in the world.
Just fancy.
It was her voice, you know, that was heard as the first announcer on the first regular telecast in England in 1936.
That's something I really didn't know.
Yes, and she's still there, working at the BBC, and now I'd like to have you meet Miss Sylvia Peters. She's an announcer in England, and she announced the 3 broadcasts that I did there in 1952, and I can assure you it was very nice to have as beautiful a young lady as Miss Peters as your announcer. Now, of course, I don't mean to imply, ladies, that women in this country can't be announcers. They can, and there are. But there are a lot of other things. And Miss Lewis, let's look at some of the careers of the women around the country, and let's show people what they're doing.
Well, while you're speaking about BBC, Lynn, I do want to point out that the International Association of Radio Women, which I happen to be co-president of currently, is going to meet at BBC in October. This is an organization built up of women from all parts of the world, and they do everything as the women in this country do. But let's meet a few of these women in radio and television, and perhaps one of the most famous, perhaps the most famous, is Mary Margaret McBride. She was listed, you know, in that book of America's 12 Master Salesmen by Harry White of the Sales Executive Club, along with Jim Farley and Tom Watson and Conrad Hilton, Norman Vincent Peale.
That's pretty good company.
Indeed, but the interesting thing was that one ad man said that she has sold more merchandise than any woman today or in any previous age. Well, I think her credo is rather interesting. Honesty is the best policy. And she loves her listeners. And she insists on doing research on every one of her products. Mm-hmm. And she uses, I think, Lynn, a sort of reporter's technique. I think that's perhaps the secret of her great success. But now from NBC, where Mary Margaret broadcasts, let's turn to CBS, to a woman who is known by more important people perhaps than any other, Miss Helen Sousa, Director of Talks for CBS, and listen to what she has to say.
Helen Sousa. You know, most of us who work spend more time at the office than at home. This is certainly true in my case. For that reason, I think all career people, especially women, should not just look for the most glamorous type of job, but for the one for which they are best suited and in which they will be most appreciated. Until I came to CBS 20 years ago as director of the Talks department, I had held executive positions in many other types of business, had made both small and large salaries. Without this experience, I never could have attained my present feeling of assurance that the job I have is the one I want. Higher titles and other jobs no longer interest me. I have found what I like to do, what I do best, and have established myself in a friendly atmosphere where I'm given responsibility and my efforts are appreciated. It takes a lot of time, work, money, experience, and self-analysis to arrive at the point where you really know that for you, this is it. It doesn't mean the end of ambition, but an awareness of values. Here's a quote I've found to be true. Success is getting what you want. Happiness is wanting what you get.
Well, let's leave Helen and go out to Cleveland, Ohio, to station WEWS-TV. I wish you could see and meet Miss Betty Cope, who began in blue jeans, as a matter of fact, as a floor manager, and today is the program manager of this fine station. And again, women really have a chance in Cleveland. I want you to meet another important newscaster, analyst, and commentator, friend of mine, Cleveland's globe-trotting grandmother, Dorothy Fuldheim.
Yes, Dorothy Fuldheim really is a globetrotter. As a matter of fact, here you can see her waiting for a brand new railroad train to come in. And like all good reporters, she climbs aboard to find out for herself exactly how this thing is going on. Of course, she meets important people, too. She interviews them. Here she's talking with Vice President Dixon. And
isn't that Adlai Stevenson?
It's Adlai Stevenson there, who she's interviewing.
She does a lot of interesting things.
And Bob Hope is a hometown boy from Cleveland, as a matter of fact. Dorothy Fuldheim did the first interview on his book. Yeah. And then WEWS sent her clear across the Pacific Ocean out into the Far East onto Formosa, where she got a first-hand report.
That was wonderful, wasn't it?
Yes. And she came back and gave a very important newscast on this after her interview, where you see her here with Madame Chiang Kai-shek.
Oh, it was a really wonderful experience. Now, look, let's go on from Cleveland to Chicago and see one of our good friends, Lynn, a woman who's known to all broadcasters, Miss Judith Waller. Judith Waller was a school teacher, you know, and she saw the potential in radio years and years ago. Starting as an assistant in an office, she became the Director of Education and Public Service for NBC in Chicago. She found the famous Miss Francis, you know, and started the Chicago Roundtable. Judith Waller is really an example of an exciting career for women in radio and television.
Well, she's not only an exciting example of that. I don't know whether you know or not. She was the first woman, as a matter of fact, the first person I ever knew in broadcasting, and Judy Waller had a lot of effect on what I did.
Well, now I can see why you're so good. But let's leave the Midwest and North, and let's go down to Dallas, Texas, and to station WFAA-TV and meet Julie Bennell. She's a wonderful girl.
We're awfully glad you could come and visit us today. You know, our recipes of the day, as always, are in the second section, the woman's section of the Dallas Morning News. And right here, over on page 4, we have 2 recipes that I think you're going to enjoy a great deal. One of them is an ocean perch Creole, and the other is a very beautiful, unusual hot biscuit that is known as an olive cheese biscuit. And here we have the finished dish of the ocean perch Creole and the cheese olive biscuit.
Well, let's go back to New York City, my own hometown, to the well-known station WQXR, where we should meet Ms. Paula Shazman and listen to the part of her program which is so remarkable.
Good evening, and welcome to The Spoken Word, a program of great poets and players recreating for your enjoyment their finest moments. There is living in Italy today an elderly Englishman of impeccable taste and remarkable wit, Sir Max Beerbohm, and this evening we will hear him read his essay.
Well, let's go out to San Francisco and meet the First Lady of the West Coast, a woman who in a few seconds gives the girls a powerhouse of advice. Here is my good friend Ann Holden.
Here's for tomorrow, Dorothy Lewis wants to know about. Well, I can only talk about the career that I know, my own, which has been in radio from the beginning of radio until now. And I suppose the thing that's important for a person who's had a long career in any field to say to somebody who's starting out a career in some field that probably the most important thing of all is, what is your motive? Why do you want to do this? What will...
That sounds just like Ann. Well, let's go up to Minneapolis to station KSTP and meet another important commentator and award winner, Bea Baxter.
And now, exclusive. A woman's view of the news by Bea Baxter, the Twin Cities' only woman newscaster, presented by Minnesota Blue Cross, the non-profit hospital care plan that is the choice of over 1 million Minnesotans.
Good afternoon. These are the Monday headlines. We tell of the beginning of one trial in Minneapolis, the delay of another. We tell of the religious significance.
Well, these are just a few of the women who've done so well in the profession. We could talk about many of them, but let's just mention a few. Grace Johnson, Chief Continuity Acceptance for the ABC Network. Agnes Law, who is the fine librarian for CBS. Geraldine Zalva, a remarkable woman who is legal advisor for ABC. Carol Irwin, the producer. Oh, there are so many. We can't begin to mention them. But there is one area of the work in radio and television, Lynn, that we haven't really talked about. and that is of writing and criticism. One of the most famous and important women in this field, a pungent and incisive reviewer of the New York World Telegram and Sun, Harriet Van Horn. Of course, Harriet not only knows the business from the viewer's standpoint, but she's a moderator and a performer in her own right, you know. And this leads me to a very important point, which Miss Horn highlights. The young girls will want to get experience in all phases of the profession before settling on one area in which you want to spend your professional life. Now, certainly we must not remember, Lynn, Jane Dalton of WSPA Spartanburg, South Carolina, who is president currently of the American Women in Radio and Television. And they're going to have their convention, you know, in just 2 weeks in Boston.
Wonderful.
Jane has done a magnificent job to mobilize those 1,200 women in radio and television.
I know her work has been very important, and I know that these young ladies from Goucher, girls, come in here because I know you have some questions that you'd like to ask Mrs. Lewis. Miss Lewis, the first question I know that they want to know is, all right, it's a great profession. There is possibility for me. How do I get into it? Isn't that right? Huh?
Well, Lynn, of course you can marry the boss. And then there's something else. If you have a little extra money in your pocket, you can buy some stock. That's quite a profound way of going about this. But seriously, I hate to say this, and you've heard it many times, a kind of valedictory, but you've really got to work very, very hard. And first of all, as you're in college now, in this wonderful college of Goucher, you're going to have to take courses that will prepare you for a general all-round education. And then specific courses, majoring in things that you're particularly interested in or fitted for. This may be writing, it may be speaking and drama, it may be engineering even, because there are lots of women engineers, or business administration. Perhaps you want to manage a station, as we have one in the West Coast, Dorothy Bullitt, owner and manager of a great station in this series
in other
of
words,
stations.
they start at the bottom and work up. These are good tips for you girls.
They sure do. And they have to go, you have to be willing to go into a small station and take any job. Now, several girls have been secretaries that have made the top of the ladder, but they had to begin the slow way.
And that's exactly the way to do it, girls. And Mrs. Lewis has given you a lot of good advice. And to you at home, to all of you girls here, to all of you there, it's a wonderful profession. Why don't you try it? If you don't want to try this one, try the one we're going to discuss next week. That career is the mathematician.
Tomorrow's Careers is produced by Lynn Poole. Associate producers are Leo Geyer and Edmund Levy. Directors Kennard Kelty and Herbert B. Cahan. Art direction by Barry Mansfield. Your narrator has been Ted Jaffe. Portions of this program have been mechanically reproduced. Tomorrow's Careers originates through the facilities of WAAM in Baltimore. Don't miss the Wednesday night fights on ABC Television Network.